It was recently announced that Niall McLaren's Formula E team, would not be continuing their stint in Formula E after the 2024-2025 season, ending a run of only 3 years, shorter than their Mercedes EQ predecessors. I have to say, as a Sam Bird fan and a fan of the McLaren team as a whole, this news hit me pretty hard. Even harder considering they finally seem to be fringe title contenders this year. But it got me thinking, if the team had found more success in their first 2 seasons, could it have potentially kept title sponsor Nyam on board with the program and led McLaren to stay in the series a little while longer? Then I remembered Felix Rosenqvist. This is going to take a little bit of context, so time for a quick history lesson. The year is 2016. 25-year-old Swede Felix Rosenqvist is one of the highest touted prospects in open-wheel racing. Multiple titles in Formula Renault, a resume that included back-to-back Macau GP wins, 2 Masters of F3 wins, a Grand Prix de Pau win, and an F3 Euro title made him one of the most successful drivers in Formula 3 history. But unlike most other drivers, Rosenqvist chose to branch out instead of sticking to the F1 pipeline route. This included GT racing, DTM, Indy Lights, and a deal with the Mahindra Formula E team. Rosenqvist would compete full-time in Season 3 alongside Nick Heidfeld at the Indian outfit. At the time, it was a mid-pack team with the best teams finish a 5th the previous year, but from lights out, Rosenqvist seemed to launch a whole new era for the team. In just a second race in Marrakesh, he scored the pole position and led 25 out of 33 laps before fading late to secure his first podium with a P3 finish. Issues would cost Rosenqvist points, but later in the season in Berlin, he'd qualify P3 and run a brilliant race, sweeping around the outside of race leader Lucas di Grassi and take his first career Formula E victory and the first for Mahindra. The next day, he scored pole and looked set to win 2 in a row when a mix-up in the pits with teammate Heidfeld gave Rosenqvist an unsafe release penalty, so despite crossing the line first, he finished runner-up. Victory was once again snatched from him in New York, where in race 2, he qualified second and led the first 10 laps, before fading to finish P2 again. Heading into the final weekend in Montreal, Rosenqvist was P3 in the standings, technically still in contention, but it wouldn't stay that way for long, as a brush with the wall cost him a top 5 finish. The next day, he'd take his 3rd pole of the season and dominate the race, but once again faded late, losing the win to Jean-Eric Vergne. So in his rookie season, Rosenqvist had scored a win, 5 podiums, 3 poles, and a P3 in the driver's standings. I've made a video covering it in more detail, but this rookie season is arguably the greatest in Formula E history. If he could just convert some of those second place finishes to wins, he could be a real championship threat. And that was exactly how he started out the next season. In race 2 in Hong Kong, Rosenqvist qualified on pole, but in the first corner he locked up the rear axle and spun it around, rejoining around 11th. He'd run an absolutely brilliant race, however, and make it up to P3 before race leader Mortara spun it and race winner Daniel Abt was disqualified, giving Rosenqvist the win in quite unorthodox fashion. He'd follow it up with his 2nd win in a row in Marrakesh after passing Sebastian Buemi with 5 laps to go. In Santiago, he turned a 14th place start into a 4th place finish, and scored the pole the next race in Mexico. After building up a solid lead, he'd suffer a battery malfunction 14 laps into the race that plummeted him down the order, putting him 2nd, minus 12 points to Vergne in the driver's standings. A few races later in Rome, he'd qualify on pole once again and dominate over half the race before a loose bolt failed in his Mahindra and the suspension and driveshaft broke after hitting a curb, retiring the Swede from the lead of the race. This unfortunately would be the last time Rosenqvist would see the lead all season, as the Mahindra package seemed to fall off towards the end of the year. In the end, he'd finished the year 6th in the standings, a far cry to what could have been. 3 poles translated to 2 victories, but those were the only podiums he'd score all season. In September of 2018, he would step away from Formula E, signing a lucrative deal with Chip Ganassi Racing in the Indycar series. Although he had tested for them in the past, I think it's pretty safe to say that his success in Formula E did contribute to Ganassi's choice. He had run one last race in Formula E trying out the Gen 2 car as Mahindra's new driver Pascal Wehrlein was prohibited from competing in a race in 2018 by his Mercedes contract. And so began his IndyCar career. He'd have a brilliant rookie season in 2019, taking 2 podiums, a pole in Indianapolis, and a P6 in the driver's standings. 2020, however, was tougher. His first career win at Road America would be the only bright spot all year, only managing to finish 11th in the standings while teammate Scott Dixon won the championship. For 2021, he made the switch to the up-and-coming Aero McLaren SP team, but it proved to be a year more challenging than the last. Only 2 top 10 finishes all year, with a nasty accident in Detroit benching him for 2 races forced him to finish 21st in the driver's standings. An awful year all things considered, especially since the driver who replaced him at Ganassi, Alex Palou, won the championship. By comparison, 2022 was a lot better. 2 poles, a podium in Toronto, and a P4 in the Indy 500 led him to finish 8th in the driver's standings, just 1 spot behind highly touted teammate Pato O'Ward. But while all this was happening, Rosenqvist was thoroughly on the hot seat. In summer of 2022, Aero McLaren announced that they had signed Ganassi's prodigy Alex Palou to join the team, alongside the newly signed Indy 500 winner Alexander Rossi. This move would leave Rosenqvist the odd man out on the IndyCar side of things. Now this is where it got interesting. McLaren had already renewed Rosenqvist's contract for 2023, but where they would put him was not specified in the deal. The most likely option was that McLaren was looking to bring Rosenqvist back to Formula E, as they had just taken over the Mercedes EQ team to become Neon McLaren, and had already signed Rene Rast to start the Gen 3 era. Now, according to Rosenqvist, he had personal conversations with McLaren CEO Zak Brown, in which he straight up told him that he would prefer to continue racing in IndyCar. I think neither Brown nor me can say, like, what are the odds? What are the chances that I'm going to stay? I've been vocal about wanting to stay because I think there wouldn't be a reason for me to want to go anywhere else right now. But this was complicated when later in 2022, according to reports from Marshall Pruett, Rosenqvist had requested himself to move to a more European-based championship due to relationship issues with his girlfriend, the pair potentially feeling homesick, both being from Sweden, and moving to a championship such as Formula E could potentially mend their problems. But this wouldn't prove to be the case, as the pair would split shortly after the request had been made. Now, Felix was stuck in the situation where he had requested to leave IndyCar, but no longer wished to. Luckily for him though, after much contract deliberation and many legal proceedings, Alex Palou would not join the McLaren team, thus allowing Rosenqvist to return to IndyCar for 2023. McLaren would end up signing Jake Hughes for the 2023 Formula E season, a deal that ended up working for both parties incredibly well. Since then, Rosenqvist has been happy in IndyCar, finding his place at the Meyer-Shank Racing team and is on pace for one of his best seasons yet. The McLaren Formula E team on the other hand signed Jake Hughes, who turned out to be a promising young star, but he took a season to develop. Rene Rast left the team after an underwhelming first year for veteran Sam Bird, who got the team's first win in Sao Paulo, but was pretty consistent all year. It wasn't until this season, season 11, that McLaren finally became true frontrunners with new prospect Taylor Barnard. Unfortunately, as we all know, this is going to be their last season in Formula E, as they recently announced the creation of a WEC program, and Formula E was no longer in their strategic portfolio. Now, for the thing that pushed me to make this video, would McLaren's situation be any different if, say, Felix Rosenqvist had come to Formula E in 2023? Of course, no one really knows for sure, but if you ask me, I think he absolutely would have hit the ground running. I compare Rosenqvist to Nick Cassidy, who excelled in the Gen 3 era. Both drivers have a lot of experience and success in a wide variety of racing series, including GT cars and junior formulas. In his very brief stint in Formula E, Rosenqvist still holds the highest win percentage out of any driver, winning 12% of all races he started. He also holds the highest pole percentage, winning pole in 24%, or just under 1 in 4 races he started. So Rosenqvist would have already had experience with Formula E's energy conservation, and with a good driver behind the wheel, the Nissan powertrains could have title contending pace, as Oliver Rowland showed. But the main reason I think Felix Rosenqvist would have done well is because of his time racing in IndyCar. For starters, Formula E and Indy cars are similar in the fact they don't have power steering. Second, the majority of IndyCar's schedule is made up of street circuits, so Felix would feel right at home. But the other main factor I want to bring up is that Rosenqvist would have had a lot of experience working the air in big packs, and in particular, fuel saving during his time on the high-speed ovals. These techniques would have felt right at home during the Peloton races that began in Season 9 of Formula E. Dare I say it, Rosenqvist would have had the biggest advantage on the Formula E grid during these Peloton races, and I very easily could have seen him being a race-winning contender for the majority of the season. And if Neon McLaren had found success far earlier and greater than they did in Formula E, would they have been more inclined to stay in the series? Would Neon feel more inclined to renew their title partnership? It didn't work out for Mercedes EQ, who won back-to-back drivers and constructors titles and left anyway, but who really knows? Maybe Zak Brown and friends would have thought differently had Rosenqvist brought home a title. Well, this was all a useless hypothetical in the grand scheme of things, but it's something I've been thinking about a lot since McLaren announced their departure, and I wanted to bring it to you guys. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Would Rosenqvist have adapted well to the Gen 3 car? Could he have saved the McLaren team from imminent collapse? I'd love to hear what you think. If you've made it this far, I truly appreciate it. Please subscribe if you'd like to see more Formula E-based content. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.